to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. I am joined only by Alan today. How are you doing, Alan?
Very good, very good. It's I think it's a lot to get through, so looking forward to it.
Yeah, James is not joining us. He's away on a road trip, an American road trip, as wonderful as that sounds. But yeah, I think as you said in the chat, the picture he sent of us where he was looked a bit like somewhere off the coast of Fife or something like that. So
Yeah, yes, he's going for a road trip. We don't know if he'll be back. If he's anywhere near the Grand Canyon, we hope he's not going to be driving off at high speed and doing a Thelma and Louise. But hopefully he'll be back on Thursday. But we don't know. Don't know where he'll be by then.
fingers crossed. Anyway, we can provide him with something to listen to while he's out on his road trip. And we'll start by looking at the Kilmarnock match, the thing that everybody was talking about, the most explosive Celtic press conference I can remember. The comments that Brendan made, I think, were not news to anybody. What were your thoughts on it? And more specifically, were you surprised that he was quite as forthright as he appeared to be?
Yeah, I thought it was a remarkable performance. But he did come across as somebody that seemed quite secure in his position and seemed quite secure about what he was saying, which is good, I think, because as I said last week, as I said on Axon, I think it was on Friday, that placement of that article in that newspaper was disgusting, really, in terms of how senior people at the club should be, conducting business. So that was terrible. I think he was right to call it out. I'm very surprised he went as far as he did, but he did it in the style of a guy that felt, as I say, quite safe in what he was saying. So that is interesting. And listen, the outworkings of that may well take some time because I'm not expecting any big kind of firings or dramas. That's not how these things are done. Above all else, these types of machinations have impacts on the market's perception of the club. The markets have to be informed of any senior changes. People are very sensitive to upsetting the markets in any way, and therefore, what I expect, based on what's been said, that the chairman may well quietly retire at the next AGM, and that will be the end of that. It will be handshakes all round, slaps on the back, glasses of champagne, gold clocks. He's a jolly good fellow, and on we go. It won't be any dramatic fireworks and what have you that people may be hoping for. It'll all be done very civilly in public and in a way that doesn't scare the cats in the markets.
There's an ongoing discussion as to whether the way that Brendan acted, given that it's quite unusual for him, he's usually much more measured and reserved in what he says. Does that inform you in any way as to what his decision is going to be, if it is his decision at the end of the season whether to stay on or not? Because obviously what he did say in the press conference is that as far as he's aware and as far as we're aware, he's not actually been made a concrete offer either.
No, I can only take him at his word of what he says. He says that he wants to. He says he's keen to. I think what's been interesting over the weekend is, how would he and the team react? And although we'll get to the match in a little bit, but overall, I was kind of heartened. Whatever you might think of some of the shortcomings of the performance, which we can get into, and as much as we didn't see any great sort of radical change to help alleviate some of the glaring issues in the squad. Nevertheless, I felt they looked like a team that were pulling for each other, that everyone seemed together on and off the pitch, and there was a togetherness there, and that was very encouraging because we don't want to see a sort of disintegration like we saw in 2020-21. No hint of that yet, obviously. As I say, and Rodgers does seem quite calm about things. Yes, there are a lot of games going on there, and there's a lot of reading between lines that can be done. But overall, as I say, he seems quite laid back about it all.
Yeah, I think that surprised me a little bit, considering how many players. Okay, Adam Ida managed to get away considering he wanted to leave. But given that we've got Yang and Maeda, who it was clear were not wanting to stay, with I'm sure others who would never found out about the fact that this team seems as together as it is quite remarkable, and probably a little bit of a testament to the way that Rodgers handles himself anyway. One area in which the togetherness was a little bit more ambiguous, shall we say, was in the pre-match protest. Now, for anybody who doesn't know or doesn't remember, there was a scheduled pre-match protest for up to the 12th minute of the match. Those who wanted to would not take their seats at the stadium, and that was to protest, obviously, everything that's happened over the summer and the less than satisfactory way in which the transfer window was handled, as well as other parts of the club and the way that it runs. Alan, I do want to get your thoughts on it. I guess the thing that it showed to me, so that there was a significant section of the away support who chose to protest in that way. But I guess what it showed to me was that, as somebody who's very invested in fan media and the online Celtic supporter space, I did get the feeling that watching that and seeing the number of people who hadn't taken part in the protest, that there is a lot of feeling out there that either the protest and the need for change isn't quite as urgent among some supporters, or even more to the point, some supporters just aren't aware of the conversations that are going on, and perhaps we're just turning up to observe the match the way that they always do. What was your thoughts on the protest and how it unfolded?
So, I think, as I've said again, and I'll go back to Axum on Friday, the lunchtime show. Personally speaking, and I'm just obviously can only speak for myself, I'm a bit reluctant to engage in anything or support anything which potentially would result in the team not getting the support that it needs, mainly because I think it desperately needs support at the moment. I think we're on a bit of a knife edge, as James and I have discussed, given injuries to key players, lack of recruitment, all the reasons that we've done over many, many times. However, and also really things are going to change. Meaningful change will come about not through sort of, if I say student politics, I don't mean that disrespectfully, but fan protest and banners and so forth alone won't force change. I think it's very difficult practically to starve the board out as we did in '94. The situation is completely different, totally different scenario to that. Change will have to come through shareholder corralling of shareholders, a building of a power base, and then sort of soft power and playing that sort of corporate game over a long term. Now, that's not to say that fan protest doesn't have a part in that. I think it does, because it's very useful. It keeps supporters focused on the issues, and it keeps the media focused on the issues as well. So it's very, very important, I think. I'm not going to nitpick about the specifics of what the protests are at this stage. I think it was a well-intentioned and reasonably well-executed protest of its type. I think Paul John Dykes of AXCOM was actually, they've been through and actually counted the people in the away, and they know how many tickets were sold. And I think something like 75% of the Celtic fans with tickets actually observed the protest. So I think that's pretty successful, really, to be fair to them, to do it in terms of the objectives. And you got to also consider the fact that, as you say, Laura, that there might be some people. There's a lot of people, in fact, the majority of Celtic fans don't spend their lives on social media, have probably never heard of this podcast, or maybe not even Axel or any of the other social media platforms, and don't care one jot for what any of us say, and that's fine, and that's probably the majority of the fans, if I'm honest. And there'll be those who had to get into the ground early because maybe they had, whether it's mobility issues or whether they got young children and they just needed to get their seat and all that kind of stuff. So there's a whole host of reasons why people would want. Some people maybe objected to it, and that's also fine. Didn't agree with it, So all these reasons come into it. So I'm not going to nitpick again about the whys and wherefores of how that could have been a higher number. I think the point was made. It was recognised on Sky TV. That's huge coverage right there. It was recognised at the game. The banners were shown. and all that. So, and it was discussed openly on the live broadcast, what the issues were. So, to my mind, that does the job of keeping Celtic fan issues in front and centre as far as the agenda is concerned. So it's big tick, I think, in that sense, job done, and hopefully minimal impact on the team on the pitch, really. But going forward, I can't speak for what will happen. But as I say, I think protest and visible fan opinion has its place, but ultimately we need to think about how we're going to, change, influence the Celtic senior leadership through, shareholder agitation, if I put it that way, shareholder disruption in the first instance. And as I say, that it's kind of dull and it's kind of long, but it is the best way, I think, to success.
Yeah, and for anybody who is a Celtic shareholder, David Lowe appeared on This Is Axom, their Friday night flagship show, and has a lot of information out there about what to do if you're a current shareholder, or if there is a possibility that there are kind of lost shareholder certificates within your family or within your possession. So that's all things that we can do to just make sure our voices are heard anyway. And as I think, as you say, it didn't need to be 100% protest. There was never going to be a case where the entire section of the Celtic support, or the entire stand, I think, as it is at Rugby Park, was going to be completely empty. But the fact that it was enough to register with the national broadcaster, and as they showed on their cameras, that it was enough to register with the members of the Celtic board who were actually there, achieves a lot. Whether it'll achieve the expected outcomes is doubtful, but it is a starting point, and the fact that it was done, I think, in the manner that you would hope it was done, so no suggestion of violence or disruption or anything like that. That's all the kind of stuff you want to hear about, because that's going to be as effective as anything. Looking at the match itself, what were your overriding thoughts? I mean, I kind of sighed a deep sigh of frustration when I looked again and saw the plastic pitch, just because something puts out my head until it's on the TV, and then I realise it's a huge factor. I actually think, again, this is anecdotal, but there's a couple of times I thought the players made mistakes that I wouldn't think they would otherwise make, just because I don't think the ball runs as true on that surface and doesn't respond quite in the way the players that are used to when they play on grass pitches. So that was just a slight thing that I noticed. But what was your overriding thoughts before we get into the nitty-gritty of some of the individual performances?
Very simply, it was a hugely satisfying win. So I think that's the overriding. And again, it was one of these you probably felt, if you can just win the game, would that be primary over the performance? But I think because of the number of new players that were playing, the performance was very interesting. But also, how would players like Maeda, who been vocal about wanting to leave and hadn't been allowed to leave, how would he respond? So there was lots of intrigue there. How would Cameron Carter-Vickers hold up on that surface with this kind of well documented sort of foot injury? Kieran Tierney, how would he be used? There's loads and loads of intrigue and interest in the actual game itself. And for the most part, certainly for the first hour, it was a snooze fest, really. But again, you've got do you blame Celtic for that? You're up against a team, like you say, in reasonably difficult conditions. On that pitch is probably the worst of the artificial surfaces. I've not seen Livingston's new one, but it is new at least. Falkirk's one is very good, but as these temper pitches go, the Kilmarnock one, as we know, is pretty poor, and it's all very old. But again, I remember ages ago I did a piece on Celtic by Numbers site looking at the games that Celtic had played on artificial surfaces, and there was no discernible difference in win percentages and all that sort of thing. Mainly because most teams that have artificial surfaces are probably not big teams, so you've got to factor that in. And I was going to maybe look at that a bit more, but I'd be surprised there was any significant reduction in points percentages, for example. I think it's probably a big drop in entertainment value if you could measure that, but not necessarily an outcome. on playing on these surfaces. So I always think it's a bit overplayed a little bit. But nevertheless, you're playing against a Stuart Kettlewell team. You know that it's going to be pretty well organised. It's going to be defensively set up. 5-3-2, or it really was a 5-4-1. One of the strikers dropping onto Callum McGregor, sitting in a pretty low block, fairly, not really pressing that high. I think Celtic had something like, I can't remember, it was over 10 passes per defensive action, suggesting Kilmarnock weren't pressing that much. They certainly weren't pressing high. And, that's a difficult challenge to break down, especially away from home on that kind of surface, etc. So, and if you look at the way the league has been this season, it's incredibly attritional. All these draws, I mean, just a fantastical amount of draws. There's a lot of teams that play in a similar way to how Kilmarnock set up. No harm to them. That maximises the resources. I mean, these guys are enormous. I mean, one of the biggest teams I've ever seen. The guy up front, I think James says he's about 6'7". I mean, and he was a decent player. He was a pest. So you have to give credit to Kilmarnock in terms of making it the game they wanted it to be. I thought Celtic were fine. They weren't brilliant. I thought they were okay. We'll get to some of the forward play in a little bit, because two out of the three forwards were kind of new in terms of a debut for Tounekti, and then Balikwisha placed on the right, which is not a usual position for him. And then Maeda, how is he going to be? Is he going to take the huff? Is he going to be the usual Maeda? So lots of things there. And then we went with a normal midfield, Nigrin, Hatate, McGregor, which I think on this programme we're a little bit sceptical as to the kind of overall balance of the midfield. And we had two new fullbacks, and obviously Celtic rely heavily on their fullbacks to supplement the attack. So there was plenty of intrigue there, and it isn't surprising that it took a bit of time to find some fluidity and to put some speed into the game to discomfort Kilmarnock too much. And actually, we looked in the first half, our chances generally came from corners rather than open play, which is bizarre. So yeah, it was a slow start, but I think, as often happens in Scottish football, it kind of sprung to life a bit in the last 30 minutes, and it was actually in the end a really dramatic game, I think.
Yeah, I think to back up what you're saying about it being a really attritional game across the league at the moment, I was listening to the guys over at 20 Minute Tims this morning, and they were saying that we've only scored, of the 5 opening matches in the league, we've only scored 2 of our goals in the first half. So it's kind of indicative that either we are slow to get going, or the way that the teams are setting up against us means that games in general are a lot more slow to open up, which you kind of hope that they will do as teams tire and going into the second half. So whether it's something that changes throughout the season, we'll need to wait and see, but it certainly has been a feature of the opening few games of the season. You talked about the new players that we've got in the team. One of those players has been getting rave reviews, one of those players not so much. We'll start with Balikwisha first. I know that you've looked into him in a little bit more detail, and I always like to come back to you on that, because my question essentially is, for Balikwisha, what is the situation in terms of how well he's playing compared to what the narrative is?
Yeah, so this is focusing just on this game, really. So let's again provide some context here. So Balikwisha has predominantly played as a left-sided attacking player in the last few seasons that he's been at Antwerp. He's had the grand total of about 12, just under 1,300 minutes as a right-sided attacker, which equates to about 14 matches in his career on that side. So it's not something he's done a lot of. I think if you wanted to, as I say, what I can gather from his prior career is his real sweet spot would be more as a sort of inside left, to use old language, rather than an out and out left-sided winger. It is, as I say, surprising, disappointing that we brought in 2 left-sided players when that's where Rodgers would rather play Maeda, and that's where Jota plays if and when he gets fit. So that just seems bizarre when you've got Yang, who they were happy to sell to Birmingham, and 34-year-old Forrest, who, bless him, I think is a cracking impact sub, but isn't going to start many games or shouldn't start many games, to be fair to him. So Balikwisha, on the basis that Rodgers decided to go with the tried and trusted sort of 4-3-3 basic shape, as opposed to listening to our pod and going radical with a sort of 3-4-2-1 shape. Once he'd made that decision, the victim, if you like, in all this, I guess, was Balikwisha, in the sense that he was the square peg that out of all the players, really. So, having said that, and also you've got to think in terms of the way the team's set up. He's got a debutant young right back behind him. So, whether that was a factor in his kind of conservatism, I don't know. But what I can't deny, having even provided all of that context, was that this was a very incredibly almost withdrawn performance. I mean, his heat map really suggests he sort of stood halfway inside the opposition half, and as I say, pretty much when he got the ball, he either played it back again or square. There was very few forward passes. He I think he had three pack passes in the whole game, which is one of the lowest in the team. I mean, granted, he only played 58 minutes. He did create one chance by taking a corner, the chance that Carter Vickers had in the first half. That was off of his corner, so that was his one scoring, one sort of expected scoring contribution that he made. He was ranked 12th out of expected scoring contribution, which is expected assists plus expected goals. Really low packing score, no shots at all. He never even touched the ball once in the opposition box, and I don't believe he touched the ball in the box against the Rangers at Ibrox either. His receiving score was okay. As I say, the one chance he created was from a corner. His passing score, as I say, off three passes was very low, and he wasn't even doing a lot of off the ball stuff, frankly, either. So it was an incredibly.
Just to clarify, the pack receiving score. What's the definition of that? Just to get a little better understanding of what that actually would signify.
So it's the other end of the transaction. If someone passes the ball forward, it takes opponents out the game, as in before the ball was passed, there was opponents between you and the goal. After the ball's passed, those opponents are now not goal side. They're wrong side of the ball relative to their own goal. When you pass to somebody, you also have to have somebody to receive it. So the pack receive score is a proxy for things like movement off the ball, finding space, control, because you only get the points if you've received the pass, controlled it, and then you're ready for the next action. If you receive the ball and it bobbles off and goes out for a throw, that doesn't count. If you receive the ball and you're immediately challenged and the ball goes out of play or whatever, or you lose possession or what have you, that doesn't count either. So it has to be a completed pass with control to get the reception points. And as I say, it's a useful.
On you go. Sorry.
It's just a useful proxy for a number of off-ball and on-ball attributes.
The reason I was asking was because there's a lot of people that might say that maybe we weren't focusing our play down the right-hand side and maybe he wasn't getting enough opportunities on the ball. But, I mean, to be fourth in pack receive score out of the whole team would suggest, I would think, to some extent, that he was getting a fair amount of the ball, and actually it is more down to maybe his choices or the things he was doing that he wasn't being as effective as he could have been, rather than the team just not playing to him.
I think that's fair. Yeah, he was very. So we'll come to this in a second when we look at some of the other players' performances on the day. What he lacked was any sense of risk taking, any sense of trying to make things happen, if you want to put it in that sort of football language. There was a complete lack of that, and I think the data, clearly bears that out. And we saw it with our own eyes. It was obvious. So as you rightly say, he was getting into decent positions. I mean, your winger receiving the ball halfway inside the opponent's half out wide is a good starting position, especially against a 5-3-2 or he was up against I think their left-sided defender Thompson was probably he was a good performer for them. He's an aggressive front foot defender as well. That may have had some impact. He may not have played on a pitch like that very often. I don't know what the Belgian league's like for these kind of surfaces. I don't want to make excuses for him. It was an incredibly, as I say, incredibly low key, risk free performance, and I hope there's an awful lot more to come from him. Is how I would leave it.
Yeah, because you've mentioned him already, and because it's on that right hand side, let's take a look at Colby Donovan, who I know that you've had a little bit of a look into. I'm messing up your sequence, I know, but we'll
No,
get
no,
to
it's, I'm messing up my sleeves because I have no idea how this user interface works. Because James normally drives this, and it's me today. So
Yeah,
anyway,
well,
those are,
we'll
those that are listening are going, what the hell are they talking about? So
yeah.
we've got graphics up if you're listening, and the graphics will be on the huddlebreakdown.com. You'll be able to see them at your leisure. So the graphic I'm putting up here is for Colby Donovan. So some key stats for him for the game, and also his kind of heat map. And this is completely different. Obviously, he's playing a different position to Balikwisha, but
Mm,
this was a fascinating performance. So Colby Donovan's first start for Celtic as a right fullback. Ralston injured, Johnson out long term, and it was a fascinating performance. If I build the narrative by saying there's some concerns here, I would say, in terms of, his defensive action success was kind of 48%. Now, some of that is losing duels in the attacking half. I don't differentiate at this stage, so not necessarily a worry in itself. There was no major defensive errors. His defensive duties were generally okay. I don't think he got, apart from the time the big basketball player bashed him over, I don't think, which was kind of comical. Other than that, I don't think there was any great sort of, defensive blunders or anything like that. The thing which stood out for me in my memory from the game was he was a little bit loose in his passing, and 77% pass completion is a 13th of the players that, the 16 players that played in the game, and it's very low for a defender, and that definitely stood out. But as you go through, the reason I think for that is that he had one key pass, and remember, he's the guy that at the end of the game was driving into the box to lay it back for Forrest to have the shot that led to the penalty. And
mm,
I think that athleticism, that strength, that stamina, because young players will tend to tire. That he's not played 90 minutes for the first team before, especially in those energy sapping conditions against that team, the physical demands of playing Kilmarnock, in the rain, etc. So he showed great stamina, strength, drive really. But what I really loved about him is how he nearly always went forward. He nearly always, in direct contrast to Balikwisha, who was ultra safe in everything he did. Balikwisha only gave the ball away 3 times. He only missed 3 passes. Now, for an attacking winger, that's the wrong profile. That's you've got to be taking risks. If you're getting the ball in the final third, I think even Peter Grant said in commentary, you don't mind your attacking forwards, wide forwards, losing the ball. It means that they're trying to do stuff. It's as simple as that.
mm,
Donovan was more that player on the right hand side. He was always trying to go forward. Four ball carries, that sort of progressive runs plus pack dribbles. So this is moving the ball with feet at least 10 meters inside the opposition half. He was second to our new Tunisian superstar in that regard. He took I think it was 3 defenders out of the game, which is the fourth highest. 3 pack passes. It wasn't in itself that particularly high. His pack receive score was second. So he was the one that was getting forward and getting on the end of passes, sometimes out from the back. His overall packing score, he was third. And he attempted more crosses, 10. 10 crosses is a lot for one player. He
mhm,
attempted more crosses than any other player. And I think only one of those crosses was successful. So there's 9 of your unsuccessful passes right there. But he's 9 unsuccessful passes contributing to a low pass completion rate, trying to create chances, trying to get the ball into the box, trying to make something happen. So whilst he was a bit raw, as you would expect, whilst he maybe gave the ball away carelessly on a few occasions, his intent was always to go forward. And I loved that. And I thought in that respect, he kind of made up for the fact that we had this risk averse winger just not doing anything in front of him. he kind of provided that threat on that side. So I thought net that was a pretty impressive performance. Rough
Yeah,
around the edges, raw, but his intent I thought was admirable.
yeah. I think it's I know it's something that not everybody agrees with or can see the benefit of, but I think for me, we are missing risk takers in this team this season. We are missing players willing to take chances. You know, Hatate was always the risk taker for us in years gone by, but even he seems to be a little bit more cautious than he has been in the past. Do you think that's something that something that we need a little bit more of, and B, given the way that Rodgers appears to want us to play at the moment, you know, is there a risk that maybe he'll try and coach that out of Colby Donovan, given his young age?
I'm not sure. I hope there's a recognition. I don't think they'd have signed Tounekti, who we'll come to in a bit. He's very much in that mold. Jota, as we talk about, is a compiler. He'll try lots of shots. He'll try lots of through balls. He'll try lots of crosses. It doesn't mean to say that the vast majority or even the majority are successful, but he's given it a go, and he's making defenders think, and he's forcing them to react to difficult situations. And that's what you want. You don't want defenders getting too comfortable. As you know, Balikwisha, a good example where they just know, well, okay, well, if I put pressure on him, he's just going to turn around and he's going to play the ball backwards. You want players like Tierney when he's on it, who's going to commit defenders, make things happen. It might not work, but you're unsettling and you're forcing the defense into actions they don't want to take. So I think it's a fair point. Is it in? And now that we're in the third year of Brendan Rodgers, and you know, the style of play that Rodgers has implemented, his game model, is intrinsically about control. It's intrinsically about having the ball, wearing the opposition down, moving them from side to side, and then, you know, as they tire, picking apart, finding the spaces, finding the holes. So I think that's a risk for sure, but I think the players that we've kind of brought in, and I'm not going to talk about Hinacho too much today because it was very much a cameo. But again, he's another one who is very creative in what he does and will take risks. So I think we've recruited almost to fix that a little bit. So I'm hopeful that that will be more of a feature as we go forward, given the players that we've brought in.
Yeah, I hope so as well. And I mean, this is a discussion for an entirely other day, but I have wondered whether Engel's lack of inclusion in the first team the start of this season has been somewhat down to his more risk taking qualities and the passes that he tries to find. But again, that's a whole other discussion for another day. Before we look at Tounekti, who I'm sure is the one that everybody wants to know your thoughts on, let's look at the left back, Marcelo Saracchi. Now, he came in under somewhat of a cloud. He was seen by a lot of the support as a little bit of a panic buy, which I'm sure he was. A guy who we didn't expect much of, was struggling to get into the Boca Juniors team by all accounts, who themselves are not the greatest team in their history either. What have you made of him so far, and what did you make of him specifically in the game against Kilmarnock? Do we have somebody on our hands that can do a job for us?
Again, very early days, but what I felt about him, because I think he's 27, maybe even 28, is he looked like an experienced pro. He looked very calm. He looked like he knew what he was doing. Positionally, he was fine. In fact, positionally, I mean, Kilmarnock really didn't threaten. It was all long ball stuff and then fight, you know. And Carter Vickers and Scales had bad heading duel stats out of this game because they were constantly up against these two absolute monsters. And although they lost a lot of duels in terms of they didn't win the first contact, virtually there was only maybe one or two that resulted in Kilmarnock picking up the second ball. So in the end of the day, it didn't really manifest. So actually didn't have hardly any defensive duels at all. In fact, only one, as I've noted on here. He didn't have to do a lot, even recoveries, which is picking up loose balls. He only had three. I think Donovan had something like 15. It was the most in the game. And now that might have been because Kilmarnock were a little bit biased towards the right side, given Donovan's a young lad, and they were maybe attacking that a little bit more. But so defensively, I don't know. We didn't see enough of him really to pass any comment on that. But on the ball, we saw a bit more of him, and his heat map there, and Celtic, on as far as the diagram are concerned, are going from right to left. So the sort of the big red blob, which is in Kilmarnock's half, and also, dare I say, kind of Greg Taylorish in terms of
Mm,
what I liked about him. I mean, clearly in front of him, he had Tounekti, who was really holding the width and wanting to play as a wide player. So he inverted quite a lot, and I liked both the angles of his runs. He would sometimes run diagonally in the field, and he would also, similarly, if he wouldn't run with the ball in that way, he was passing on the diagonal. So he wasn't passing in straight lines up and down the pitch. He was passing on the diagonal, and that's how you better break teams down. So I like that about him. I like the runs he was making with the ball on the diagonal as well. I think he linked up with Tounekti, considering they never played together, considering they probably hardly even trained together. And given Tounekti, you really wanted to leave him one on one with the fullback. There were a few moments where Saracchi would actually almost take his space by making an inverted run, but he kind of stopped that after a while. And I think they worked it out in the end quite nicely to leave the winger and let him get on with it, and Saracchi would just be there as sort of the out ball if needed. So I'm maybe reading too much into that, but I sensed a kind of mature, experienced, quite intelligent player. I liked his movement on and off the ball. Again, listen, it's very early days. He carried the ball three times again in the opposition half, took five defenders out of the game. 42 pack passing score is the second highest in the team, and he only played 58 minutes. His
mm.
assist was a thing of joy. I mean, when was the last time we saw a Celtic player hit a diagonal low cross into the box in the manner that he did? It was such a thrilling moment, that, and so unexpected, because we just don't see that. So that was excellent as well. So I thought it was pretty encouraging, actually. But again, let's come back after 900 minutes. Um, but he produced a magic moment. I thought he was clever. I liked his movement and his passing. I liked the angles he was taking. Can't really comment on him defensively, but yeah, I thought it was pretty solid.
Yeah, I think it's the same with a lot of Celtic players that have defensive roles. It's sometimes very hard to establish how good they are for a long time, because they essentially aren't under a lot of stress or pressure in the majority of the games that we play in. And to go back to what you were talking about, the cross or the diagonal ball for Maeda's goal, I think it always speaks volumes for the quality of a ball if a player doesn't have to get much on it to direct it towards goal. And it was, maybe I'm doing a little bit disservice to Maeda by saying it was a glancing header, but it certainly didn't need an awful lot of redirection or repurposing from the ball that was put in. So that speaks to the qualities of the ball itself. And as you say, the attacking stats there that you see, considering he's third for defenders packed, second for pack pass score, fourth for pack and score, third for ball carries, all within 58 minutes, is a testament to how effective he was, certainly going forward. And I think certainly domestically it'll prove to be effective for us, and maybe a little bit more of a risk taker like Donovan, putting balls like that into the box. So it'll be exciting to see. Going a bit further up the pitch, but staying on that left-hand side, the one that everybody's been raving about is obviously Tounekti. The most difficult thing for me is how to spell his name. I cannot get the K
I
and the
know.
T the right way around at the end. I
No,
don't know if he's
no,
Tounekti or Tounekti. I can never get it quite right. But
yeah.
yeah, but what's your thoughts? I always like to see whether the hype on a player is justified in your eyes, or whether there's. And I know he's far away from your desired sample size, but what are you making so far, and especially of that first performance?
So just before I get into that, just the
Hmm.
last word on that Maeda goal,
Yeah,
um, and one of the reasons the cross was so brilliant from Saracchi is Maeda's movement for that goal is world class. It's
yeah.
absolutely world class. If that goal had been scored by Alan Shearer or Teddy Sheringham, right, in an English Premier League game, you'd never be hearing the end of it, right?
Mm,
That's how good it was. It was the sort of goal that those types of players would have scored, and the sort of goal you very rarely ever see in the English Premier League anymore. By the way,
Yeah.
probably see more of it in Scotland actually. That sort of cross into the big lad in the middle. Obviously, Maida's not a big lad, but this movement was he absolutely killed the Kilmarnock defence with his movement, the timing of his movement, and for that cross, which was a whipped-in cross, to be that accurate and pacey and flat, and Maida to time it that perfectly that all he had to do was make contact. I say all. That was at that speed. That's really difficult.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a meal of that really because I just thought it was worth it. I thought it was an absolutely brilliant piece of skill from
No,
both players.
and I did see one of the pundits. I can't remember who it was, but somebody talking about the defenders ball watching a little bit. But I always think that is something that players can appear to do if the striker's movement is that good. It makes the defenders look static when actually they've not been. It's just that, as you say, his movement was on such a high level that it made everybody else look as if they were, yards and yards behind. But no, I think a great goal and certainly something I would like to see more of going forward.
Okay. So, if the stat pack for subscribers, the stat pack is up on huddlebreakdown.com. Spoiler alert, Tounekti, and I've managed to get the K and the T round. I keep wanting to add an R. So that's my blind spot. I want to add an R in the middle of that somewhere. But anyway, so I'm adding letters. I'm making it more complicated. That probably tells you a lot, doesn't it? So he was my kind of boy of the match, as I cheesily call it. So spoiler alert there. And listen, this was just a litany of great stats that he generated in the game. He had the highest expected scoring contribution, nearly one, which is expected goals plus expected assists, and the highest attacking threat score easily by about 5. He took the most shots. We'll come back to that. He had the highest packing receive score, 106. Created 4 chances, the same as Nygren, the much maligned Nygren, which I'm going to come back to, not today, but I'm probably going to write a piece on because I'm just aghast at the criticism that he gets. The highest back dribbling score. Now, I'm going to dive into that in a second, Laura. That 37 is a significant number, and I'll explain that in a minute. He took out the most defenders from the game from his forward-going actions. 13 is an insane number of ball carries, and he had the highest packing score across the team by 73. He's almost double anybody else. So that's just an incredible individual performance. Having said that, I thought he did a great job for the team. He was the outlet. He was a constant danger. What a thrilling player! We credit to James in his benchmarking, and also Ross Hall on Celtic Underground wrote a long article about him before the game, and they were both spot on. I mean, he really did play as advertised, but what you don't know is how it contextualizes into, but he's not played for a club like Celtic, he's not played in this league. So, yeah, the general consensus, and we saw this on the day, is brilliant dribbler, takes people on, doesn't cross the ball, his shooting's woeful. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, and we saw all of that. But what I think the subtlety of it is, I don't think he ever whipped a crossing or just beat a man and then just smashed it across the box. He always what I would call passed it, didn't cross it. He actually played a deliberate along the ground pass to somebody, which I love. Now I think ideally you might want a little bit of both. Sometimes just beat your man because you're, by the looks of him. Now he's going to be up and off against an awful lot better defenders than that poor lad Brown that plays for Kilmarnock. He played for Ross County. He's a trier, bless him, but he's not a great player. He's going to come up against better players, but he looks like he's always going to be able to get against most defenders, get a yard. Sometimes it is appropriate just to whip it, smash it across, and let Maida use his pace to get on the end of it. He was much more deliberate and precise about his passes into the box and all that. So that's something which I think is good and as general, but I hopefully can mix it up a little bit as well. His shooting was poor, definitely. None of his shots were great. They were all from not great angles, and none of them I don't think were on target. So that's definitely one that maybe, and he is going to be, I think, a bit like Jota, a bit of a compiler, as opposed to a Maida or a Kyogo who are all about precision, and they'll eke out high high numbers from a low volume of chances. He'll generate high numbers from a high volume of chances. But that's fine. That's fine. Again, he looks like he's going to take risks. So super exciting in general. Just a joy to watch is the most important takeaway. But if I just add an extra slide here. So I thought, right, 37 pack dribbling score. That's really high. So I look back at my match records. Now, I've probably been recording packing since about 2017-18, maybe. Yeah, about then. So we've probably got about 7 years of it, right? Tounekti's score of 37 pack dribbling. The only people ahead of him who've ever scored a higher score in a single match are lots and lots of examples of Chris Ayer, and the highest ever was Frimpong in a home game against Hibs in 2019. It's astonishing to think we had Frimpong and Ayer in the team at the same time. Crazy ball carrying up the pitch. What that means is no forward, no attacker, no winger has had a higher pack dribbling score in my recorded history, i.e. the last 8 years, than what he achieved on his debut at Kilmarnock on the plastic in that match. So that's noteworthy. And then if you look at the other aspect of it, which is total number of ball carries. So total number of ball carries is he had 9 pack dribbles, so 9 times he took the ball past an opponent and took them out of the game, and 4 times he carried the ball more than 10 metres inside the opposition half with the ball at his feet, even though he didn't take anyone out of the game. So add those two together, that's the number of ball carries. And again, there's only Jota against Hearts in August 22 who's had more ball carries. I've filtered out all. There'd be like 100 Ayers in front of this, by the way. So I just filtered this to be the attacking players, the wingers, essentially. And there's only Jota ahead of him in terms of number of ball carries completed in a match. Again, already he's nestled in between 4 Jota appearances. So again, if we can get Jota on the right, maybe, and him on the left, that's going to be a absolute chaos forward line that we're going to have there. That's very exciting, by the way. And it's the sort of thing as well, which is going to be super important in Europe, because although we're focusing here on taking out defenders and that sort of thing, one of the key aspects is against European teams, especially away from home, especially against stronger opponents. If you've got people that can carry the ball a long way, take the pressure off the defence and get the ball up the pitch, and even if they just win a throw-in, or even better if they win a corner, it just completely changes the dynamic of the game. It just eases the pressure on you in those kind of difficult matches. So it's a great skill to have in the squad. We don't have too many people that can do that. So I thought that very noteworthy, statistically significant. I'm struggling not to get too excited here. He needs to kind of repeat this. I mean, his number of goals and assists in his career so far hasn't been eye-catching particularly, and we didn't have any goals or assists in this match. So let's be cautiously optimistic, I would say. And obviously, I'll do a deeper dive after 900 minutes. But you couldn't say it was anything other than an absolute standout debut for sure.
Yeah, and that's the only concern I think to have, is that it's a very promising start, and in terms of one-off performances, it's certainly up there. But you just hope it's not been influenced too much by the adrenaline of a debut, and that he can maintain it going into other matches, which I think is fair. But yeah, promising start and something to get excited about for sure, and builds on what we kind of expected, as you say, from what James and others were saying before he started. I'll be looking forward to seeing more of him in the weeks to come. Looking towards the end of the match, obviously it took a very, very late award of a penalty, and by VAR at that, to get the victory. Now I'm always of the belief that it is somewhat, although the rules are well defined in most cases, is somewhat subjective in terms of whether you think that the penalty was a penalty or not, and that there's a lot of circumstances that contribute to that. My take on it is that by the letter of the law, it was a penalty. However, to be honest, having watched the show that they're now doing with Sky Sports on YouTube around the interpretation of VAR, is a lot more subjective than I thought it was. It's very much down to the referee's interpretation of player intent, which I didn't realise was as big a factor as it appears to be, and the circumstances in which the handball occurs. So, it's no clearer to me how they can be consistent about these decisions. But for me, I'm glad it was a penalty, obviously, and I do think it was a penalty. What was your thoughts when you saw it and the discussion that's kind of evolved around it since the decision was made?
Yes, a lot of astonishment and a lot of resignation about some very predictable post-match outcomes on this one. I was astonished it was given. I really genuinely was very, very surprised it was given. Especially, I don't know I can't remember who the VAR is, but I, I mean, I don't think John Beaton could possibly have seen it in real time. I don't, I don't think the referee would have picked that up in any shape or form. It was such a quick thing, the cutback, the shot, two players coming together, ricochets, and all at quite close quarters. So I actually feel I actually feel a bit sorry for John Beaton, and cut and paste that and put it on social media because I'll never say that again, probably.
Yeah, just to
And I
jump in
think
on that,
what's
by the way, that was
mm,
another thing I was going to say. The discussion between Gordon and Willie Collum on the VAR show on YouTube. I didn't realise as well that proximity of the offending player to the ball is a major factor. I.e., if you are too close, then it's deemed that almost you can't get out of the way, and therefore you're not responsible
yeah.
for whether it hits the hand. Based on that, I think, like you say, it's a surprise that it was given, but it's but again, it's down to interpretation. There's no black and white rule about being a certain distance away or being having a certain number of players between you and the ball or whatever. It's still very open to interpretation. Sorry, I just wanted to, because you reminded me of that.
No, you're right, and I think that ultimately Kilmarnock are very unlucky, and actually they are the victims of bad timing. And the reason that I say that is because, as you say, Gordon Duncan and Willie Collins' SFA VAR review show, which I think is on YouTube now for August, was put up. Was it put up last week? Maybe for the first bit of the season.
Yeah,
Whenever
yeah.
it was recent. It was recent, and there hadn't been any league games since that was put out. And the opening, it's worth going back, all of you, and watching the first three or so minutes of that show, because it talks about an incident that happened in a Hibs St Mirren game at the end of the game, where the ball hits a St Mirren player late in the match and no penalty is given, and Columns calling that out as being an error by the refereeing team. Now, what is fascinating about that? Now, I think that the handball law interpretation is an absolute mess. It's a shambles.
Hmm.
I still don't claim to understand it. But what emerged in that discussion on the VAR show were a couple of things that surprised me and were new to me. And as I'll come to, I think that's influenced what's happened at Kilmarnock. One, as you say, is that previously I'd understood that proximity, when the ball suddenly from very short distance hits somebody in the arm, it is a potential mitigant, and also the event where the ball strikes a player, bounces up and hits another player on the arm is also considered could be a mitigant as well. And I think that is the case. But what Willie Collum made clear in the St Mirren Hibernian incident is that in his view, the ball was travelling towards the goal when it hit the arm, and the
Hmm.
arm wasn't in a natural position, and therefore, under those precise circumstances, the two potential mitigants of proximity and it cannoned off another player and reared up and hit the arm weren't relevant in that scenario. That subtle interpretation I'd never heard before, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for Kilmarnock, as it always happens, sod's law and all that, almost exactly the same thing happens in the next game, the live game on Sky. And whereas Beaton, I don't think the referee has to see. I can't blame him for not seeing what happened. What the VAR has picked up on is thinking, oh, Well, Willie Collins specifically called out this type of incident in the last show. In fact, it was the headline segment in the show, and it looks like something very similar has happened in this match, where Forrest takes a shot, it gets blocked by one defender, it rears up, another defender's got his arm in a kind of unnatural position, hits his arm. They've judged the ball was going on target. I think that's a stretch. I couldn't see. That wasn't conclusive to me in any way. So I would have expected, given that it wasn't conclusive, the ball was going on target, that you'd kind of go with the on-field decision. That's my honest opinion. That's what I would expect to happen. But one of the consequences of Willie Collum having this transparency now over refereeing, by having this review show, having the KMI, this panel publish their paper every week, reviewing all the referred incidents, all the VAR incidents, that transparency in and of itself, without changing any of the referees, improving the training, making them full-time, giving them lessons on, unconscious bias, all of those things, cultural training, maybe cultural diversity training. None of these things have happened, and yet behaviour's changed. Behaviour has definitely changed, and we saw this last season. Last season, there was virtually nothing between the impact of big calls in games between the top two, whereas the previous 4 seasons, when Crawford Allen was in charge of refereeing, there was consistent patterns of assistance that benefited one side. That didn't happen last season. Now, that leads so I think the specific incident, as I say, incredibly unlucky for Kilmarnock, comes on the back of a similar incident, St Mirren Hibs. The refereeing team have probably got that in their minds, thinking, right, we don't want to be on Willie's show on Thursday being called out for getting this wrong, especially as he's just told us what he expects, and therefore they've given the penalty. Now, I wouldn't have given the penalty, but that I think that's the background. I think Kilmarnock are unlucky. Then we move to the post-match, and we move from unpredictable and unexpected to utterly predictable and utterly expected, which is, if Celtic benefit from a lucky refereeing call, it seems to unite Scottish football in a way that no other issue can, and we never sort of hear the end of it. So that's just predictable, and it's boring, and it's just what we all kind of expect. So again, we can all fixate over individual incidents. The key is to monitor this over a long period of time. I've given, obviously, that incident and a couple of other handball incidents in this match, and the various incidents that looked controversial, let's call it, in the match at Ibrox. They're all with the Yorkshire Whistler. His assessment is always free to air on huddlebreakdown.com. I've not got his view on those yet, and they'll be with you as soon as I can get them back and get them up on the site.
Absolutely, yeah. It's almost as if there's a cultural issue in Scotland that means that any non-Celtic supporter always have a preference for a certain other team. But, that's not for me to
Laura.
say. Some people might say that. That's not for me to say. No, I get everything that you're saying, and I think it was highly ironic, but, like you say, that's the way things work out, that this particular decision mirrored so heavily that one in that show. I would hate to think that very factor has influenced the actual making of that decision to be any different than it would have been any other week, but I can't help but feel that has been exactly the case. I think my overriding feeling coming away from watching that show was that these rules are there to be interpreted by the referees, and therefore there is no such thing as consistency that can reign, even with VAR, which is supposed to be this kind of black or white, correct or not correct decision. It's still a human being at the end of the day making the decision and looking at the screen and calling the referee over and saying, I think you might want to have a look at this. So I don't think we'll ever get away from the human element of these decisions, with the exception, obviously, of goal line technology and maybe offside if the technology catches up with itself. It's certainly an interesting show, and like you say, I would encourage anybody to watch it. Whether you agree with what's said on it or not is a whole other matter, but it's certainly good to it was fun. It's funny apart from anything else to hear the referees shouting at everybody to go away while they're trying to talk to the VAR room.
Yeah, no, listen, as I say, it appears to have changed behaviour. So we've moved from patterns of assistance, one side, and actually one of the things about patterns of assistance over Crawford Allen's reign of error was it wasn't the decisions that were given; it was decisions that weren't given. The key feature of patterns of assistance was that the Rangers were almost immune to adverse jeopardy. Bad things simply didn't happen to them. That was the key feature. What we're seeing now, I think, with transparency over decision making, as I say, isn't an improvement in refereeing performance, but what we're seeing is what I think we always wanted as a minimum, which is that every team appears to be being impacted by bad decisions more or less equally. Now, there'll be exceptions, there'll be little bumps and troughs and on that, but over a period, and I'm talking last season, broadly, everyone kind of got hammered by these crap refs, and that's fine as long as everyone's being treated the same. That's all we've ever asked for. I still think there's a huge job to improve the quality of the refereeing. That's almost a different story. But all we ever wanted was equality of outcome in terms of distribution of errors, and I think we seem to be moving in that direction.
And if it's bad refereeing, as long as it's fairly bad, and by that I mean equally bad for all, then that's at least a step in the right direction. As Alan says, any written stuff from him, anything from the Yorkshire Whistler, anything from James, and the graphics that you would have seen or heard us talking about if you were listening on audio will all be up on the Huddle Breakdown, where you can subscribe to get all of that, plus the extra podcast show we do with Martin every week as well. Alan, I will leave it to you guys later in the week to preview the future games. I think everybody's had enough of our two voices, and that'll be enough for this week. So thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you again very, very soon.